There is a moment, right before your life changes, when you realize that what you've been calling reality is nothing more than a memory echoing back at you. And tonight, I want you to feel that moment in your body. Let your shoulders soften. Let your breath expand slowly. Because everything you're about to hear is not information, it's recognition. You're not here to learn something new. You're here to remember what you've always sensed, that the world in front of you is not commanding your focus, it's reacting to it. What you see outside is not the living part of your life, it's the past, crystallized. Neville Goddard called it the echo, the faint residue of previous assumptions, previous emotions, previous versions of you. And yet, when the echo gets loud, when circumstances start shouting, something inside you trembles. Not because you're weak, but because you were conditioned to believe that the external world is the one with authority. You look at the bills, the silence from the person you love, the email that never comes, the number in your account, and your chest tightens. Your mind whispers, if I don't react, won't things get worse? If I don't intervene, won't this fall apart? That whisper is not intuition. It's insecurity taught by a world that forgot how creation actually works. You've been living in a constant tug-of-war between what you feel inside and what you're seeing outside. And I know how exhausting that has been. You wish you could hold your focus, stay loyal to the new reality you're building, but the old one keeps banging on your door. Circumstances flare up, delays appear, people behave unpredictably, and suddenly you're pulled back into the same emotional patterns you swore you had already healed. Not because you don't have discipline, and not because you don't believe enough. You lose focus because the echo screams louder than your inner voice, and you were never taught that the echo has no power unless you feed it. You were never told that by reacting to it, you reinforce it. And by holding your center, you starve it. Let your breath settle deeper now. Feel your chest expand slowly, as if you're creating more space inside yourself for a truth you've ignored for too long. Focus is not stubbornness. Focus is authorship. Focus is the quiet announcement of which version of you is allowed to survive. And this is where your transformation begins. In realizing that every time you choose to stay loyal to the new state, even when the old one protests, you're actually dissolving the past. Greg Braden speaks about coherence, that moment when your mind and your heart align so clearly that your electromagnetic field expands, stabilizes, and commands reality with a precision you can feel in your skin. That coherence begins with focus, not frantic focus, not forced focus, but quiet, grounded, stable focus that says, I decide what remains alive in me. Something in you already knows this. There is a deeper intelligence beneath your fear, a part of you that has been waiting for this realization. Because once you understand the echo, you never confuse noise for truth again. You stop letting circumstances dictate your assumptions. You stop collapsing your desires because the world hasn't caught up yet. You stop giving meaning to delays, resistance, or silence. You begin to see 3D for what it truly is, a delayed reflection, powerless without your attention. Feel your breath again. Slow present, anchored. As you inhale, imagine that you're calling your power back from every moment you reacted to an echo. As you exhale, imagine the old assumptions dissolving like dust that no longer belongs to you. Tonight, your only task is to recognize the conflict that has been defining your life, the tug between reacting to the echo and feeding the new reality. And quietly, gently, truthfully, we will walk together through this. Because once you master your focus, once you understand the echo, reality stops overwhelming you and starts obeying you. When the echo gets loud, your brain falls back into its oldest habit, prioritizing what threatens you over what empowers you. Neuroscience calls this the negativity bias, but you felt it your entire life. One negative circumstance overshadows 10 internal victories. One delay feels more real than a week of alignment. One unexpected bill seems heavier than all the inner shifts you've made. The echo capitalizes on this bias. It knows that if it can trigger your survival reflex, you will abandon the path of creation and return to the path of reaction. And so the echo presents itself as urgent, demanding, dangerous. But it is only a reflection. It has no life of its own. What gives it life is your attention. Slow down your breath for a moment and notice how often you confuse the echo with your identity. You look at a circumstance and you immediately say, This is who I am. This is my life, this is my pattern. But the circumstance is not you. It is the version of you that you are shedding. The problem is never the situation. The problem is the mistaken belief that the situation defines you, controls you, or reflects your worth. Focus breaks not because the world is powerful, but because you forget that the world is delayed. You forget that it takes time for the reflection to catch up. And in that gap, the old identity tries to pull you back into itself, hoping you will unknowingly resurrect it. There is a silent turning point available to you in those moments. A simple, gentle naming of what is happening. This is the old state dissolving, not the new state failing. When you say this within yourself, the grip of the echo loosens. You step out of panic and into authorship. You reclaim your center. You stop interpreting every ripple in 3D as a sign of collapse and start seeing it as evidence of transition. Your nervous system softens, your breath deepens, and suddenly, what felt like chaos begins to look like rearrangement, because that is what it is. Rearrangement, not danger. Transformation rarely looks graceful. A snake shedding its skin looks chaotic, uncomfortable, even alarming. But nothing is wrong. Something new is emerging. Something more aligned. Something more alive. And you are the same. When the echo gets loud, when the old identity begins to peel away, it feels messy. It feels unfamiliar. It feels unsafe. But it is not danger. It is release. It is the past breaking apart under the weight of a new assumption. It is your life reshaping itself around your focus, and the moment you see that clearly, you stop panicking. You stop abandoning yourself. You stop reacting to noise. And that is when your focus becomes unshakable, right when you need it most. This is where so many people misunderstand what is happening inside them. They think the anxiety means something is wrong. They believe the tension in their body is a sign that their manifestation is failing, or that they misread the path, or that they are being punished by some unseen force. But the truth is far quieter and far more compassionate. The stress you feel is not a spiritual signal. It is biology adjusting to a new identity. When you imagine a new future, your brain releases a wave of dopamine, a burst of possibility, a moment of expanded awareness. But that burst is temporary. Once it settles, your mind instinctively gravitates back toward the familiar, because the familiar feels safer even when it is painful. So when you choose a new assumption, when you dare to step into a version of yourself you've never lived before, your brain instinctively clings to the old pattern. It is not self-sabotage, it is adaptation. In this transition, the echo becomes incredibly persuasive. It uses your own body to convince you to return to the old self. Emotional arousal masquerades as intuition. Anxiety disguises itself as a warning. And you begin to believe that your discomfort means the new reality is incorrect or unstable. But discomfort is not the enemy. Discomfort is the doorway. Your nervous system is not telling you to stop. It is telling you that you are stepping into unfamiliar territory, and it does not yet know how to orient itself within this new identity. What feels like danger is often nothing more than unfamiliar freedom. This is why creating a small moment of inner clarity changes everything. When the echo presses against your chest and your breath becomes shallow, there is an exquisite power in acknowledging what is happening inside you, not analyzing it, not fighting it. Simply noticing the difference between bodily fear and intuitive knowing. Intuition is steady, grounded, spacious. Fear is tight, urgent, and loud. When you can sense this distinction, even for a moment, your inner world settles. The body softens. The mind stops interpreting every sensation as a sign, and the echo begins to lose its influence. Stepping into a new state is like stepping into cold water. The shock is intense at first. The body tenses. The breath stops. Every instinct urges you to pull back to warmth, but if you remain still for a moment, the shock fades. The water becomes familiar. The body adapts, and what once felt impossible becomes natural. Your nervous system behaves the same way. When you stop reacting to the first shock of the echo, your body recalibrates. Your inner state stabilizes, and the version of you that once felt fragile becomes the version of you that feels inevitable. There is an invisible habit many spiritually aware people fall into. When you desire something deeply, you start monitoring 3D with a vigilance that feels like responsibility, but is actually spiritualized anxiety. You check your phone repeatedly. You observe every change in your bank account. You analyze the behavior of others. You look for signs, signals, proof, and you tell yourself that this is awareness or alignment or intuition. But beneath it all lies a quiet fear that if you do not keep watch, your desire will slip away. This hypervigilance creates a loop. Instead of trusting your inner state, you begin to measure your progress through the very circumstances you are trying to transcend. And in doing so, you recreate the old. This cycle is not mystical, it is psychological. The Pygmalion effect teaches that expectations shape behavior, and behavior shapes outcomes. When you watch the world with nervous anticipation, you subtly behave as someone who doubts, someone who waits, someone who fears loss. And that emotional posture sends your energy back into the past. You then interpret the unchanged circumstances as proof that you are stuck, and your reaction reinforces the very identity you're trying to shed. You think you are observing the world, but in truth, you are fulfilling the prophecy of your own fear. The echo shows you the past, and you react as if it were the present. And in that reaction, the past is reborn. There is a turning point available in moments like this. A quiet, introspective question that stops the cycle before it repeats itself again. What version of me is this moment trying to drag me back into? That one question reveals everything. It shows you whether you are about to respond as the old self or remain anchored in the new one. It invites you to notice the identity behind the reaction, and when you observe this clearly, your focus returns to its rightful place, not on the world, but on the one who creates it. The echo loses its seduction. It stops appearing as a threat and begins to reveal itself as a shadow of a former state. The dynamic is simple once you see it. Imagine checking a cake in the oven every 20 seconds. You open the door again and again, hoping it is rising faster, hoping for visible proof that the heat is working. But with each anxious check, you let the warmth escape. You collapse the rise. The cake never becomes what it could have been. Not because the recipe was wrong and not because the oven failed, but because the constant checking interrupted the natural process. This is how many people treat their manifestations. They stir the echo, disturb the process, and then wonder why nothing seems to change. The greatest blockade to this understanding is the belief that circumstances are passive, that they are just there. But circumstances are reactive. They reflect your internal coherence or your internal fragmentation, and the moment you treat them as fixed, the moment you give them authority over your emotional state, you return to being a witness rather than a creator. You slip back into the identity that watches life unfold, instead of the identity that generates its outcomes. And so you lose focus, not because you lack discipline, but because you forget that your attention is the architect shaping every piece of the external experience. The moment you give more weight to what you see than to what you have assumed, the old reality gains enough energy to linger. Neville's teaching is precise and simple. Assumption becomes fact through persistence, not intensity. You do not need to force your mind. You do not need to strain your imagination. You do not need to overpower your doubts. Creation does not come from effort. It comes from loyalty. It comes from returning again and again to the inner truth you have chosen. But this is where most people stumble. They believe they need more discipline, more willpower, more visualization. In reality, what they need is identity alignment, because when you shift who you believe yourself to be, focus becomes effortless. You no longer try to stay loyal to the new state, you simply exist in it. There is a simple alignment that quietly reshapes your entire relationship with reality. First, you name the state, not the desire, not the outcome, not the circumstance, but the state of being that naturally produces the life you want. Second, you feel the implication. You let the emotional truth of that state settle into your body, not as a fantasy, but as familiarity. And third, every time the echo tries to provoke you, every time the old reality attempts to pull you back into its gravitational field, you return to the state. Not with force, not with panic, but with recognition. You come back to yourself, not because you fear losing the new reality, but because you know that you are the source of it. This rule becomes clearer when you imagine how a laser works. A laser does not cut steel because it is powerful. It cuts because its focus is sustained. Each particle of light is coherent, aligned, unwavering, and that coherence gives it the ability to reshape solid matter. Your mind works the same way. Your focus is the laser. Your state is the coherence. When your attention stops scattering across fear, doubt, checking, reacting, you become energetically precise. The world begins to yield. The old structures soften. What once looked immovable starts to bend. Focus then is not a battle, it is a remembrance. It is the quiet recognition that you are not observing reality. You are generating it, not with force, but with fidelity, not with effort, but with identity. And once this becomes your truth, the echo fades, the past dissolves, and the present begins to shape itself around the new state you no longer struggle to hold, because it has become the only version of you that feels real. In psychology, this phenomenon is clear. When a behavior provides relief, even momentarily, the brain learns to repeat it. It becomes a loop, a reward cycle. So each time you react to an echo, each time you allow your emotions to spike and you respond impulsively to 3D, you are training your subconscious to believe that reaction equals safety. And once this association is formed, your body begins to crave the reaction, even when it harms you. This is why people feel restless when they try to stay calm. This is why silence feels threatening. This is why stillness feels like danger. Your mind has been conditioned to equate reactivity with survival, even when your soul is asking for something softer, quieter, more powerful. And beneath that reactivity, something deeper is happening. You are not responding to circumstances. You are responding to your deeper fear of losing the future you desire. The pain is not in the moment itself. The pain is in the fear that the moment means something fatal about your destiny. When the phone doesn't ring, when the message doesn't come, when the opportunity delays, your mind fills the silence with meaning. It says the future is slipping, the desire is fading, the universe is ignoring me. And that interpretation triggers the emotional flood that fuels the reaction. You are not fighting the world. You are fighting the fear of being denied. There is a transformational shift that occurs when you begin to question the direction of your reactions. You pause, not to control yourself, but to see more clearly. What future am I feeding right now? This question moves your awareness from the echo to your identity. It reveals whether your emotional energy is creating the life you want or sustaining the life you no longer resonate with. And as this clarity grows, the urgency to react weakens. Your breath deepens. Your awareness returns to the present moment, and you begin to recognize that calmness is not passive, it is creative. It is the energy of someone who is no longer negotiating with the echo of the past. Imagine standing in a warm room during winter. The heat is steady, comforting, alive, but every few minutes you open the door to make sure your pet is still inside, and with each opening, a wave of cold air rushes in. The warmth escapes, the room cools, and you blame the heater for not working. Yet the warmth was never the problem. The problem was the constant checking. This is what happens when you react compulsively. You keep opening the door to the old identity, letting its cold air invade the new state you are trying to cultivate. And then you wonder why the new state doesn't stabilize. The truth is gentle. You do not need to fight your reactions. You only need to see the emotional transaction behind them. The moment you understand that reaction is not power but addiction, something softens inside you. You stop giving your energy to the echoes. You stop feeding the past. And quietly, almost imperceptibly at first, your emotional world begins to reorganize itself around stability rather than panic. This is the beginning of true control, not the control of circumstances, but the control of focus, which shapes every reality you will ever live. When everything contradicts your desire, the deepest blockade is not the circumstance itself, it is the need for validation. The mind craves confirmation because uncertainty feels dangerous. Behavioral economics names this discomfort clearly. Humans have a low tolerance for the unknown, and the fear of uncertainty drives compulsive checking. This checking becomes emotional, then spiritual, and finally vibrational. You look outward to feel safe instead of looking inward to feel real. And as you seek signs in 3D, you unknowingly place your power in the echo, not in the state that creates the new world. The moment you need proof, you disconnect from the energy that makes proof inevitable. Yet there is a paradox here that becomes obvious only when you step into your deeper awareness. The moment you stop seeking proof, the proof appears. Not because the universe is withholding anything, but because your need for evidence was the very energy that signaled doubt. When you release the urgency to check, evaluate, or measure your progress, your internal frequency stabilizes. You stop wobbling between states. You stop bargaining with the old reality. You stop collapsing into fear every time a circumstance contradicts what you have chosen. And in this stability, something remarkable happens. The external world finally has the space to rearrange itself. There is a kind of inner discipline that emerges naturally when you choose stability over proof. Not discipline in the sense of force or tension, but discipline as a quiet devotion to your inner state. You begin to recognize that your feelings are not determined by what you see, they are determined by what you have accepted as truth. And from that acceptance, a new kind of calm arises. You no longer feel the urge to evaluate your progress based on appearances. You no longer measure your worth through outcomes. You no longer interpret delays as rejection. Your focus becomes gentle, grounded, undisturbed. The echo may still be loud, but it no longer dictates your internal world. There is a strange, almost paradoxical moment on the path of conscious creation that few people recognize until they live through it. It is the moment when everything appears to get worse just before it gets better. You hold a new assumption. You claim a new identity. You decide to step into a reality that feels more aligned, more alive, more truthful. And right when you start to stabilize in that new inner state, the outer world begins to tremble. Things break. People behave unexpectedly. Systems you relied on seem to collapse. The familiar becomes unstable. And a deep fear rises inside of you, whispering that you made a mistake, that this inner shift is not working, that the chaos is a sign of failure. But the heart knows something the mind forgets. Transition often disguises itself as turbulence. When the old reality begins to dissolve, it rarely leaves quietly. It resists. It shakes. It tries to anchor you back into its gravitational pull. And in that shaking, you might interpret the noise as a warning. You might feel that the universe is turning against you, that your inner work has somehow invited disorder instead of harmony. But what is happening is far more intimate and far more intelligent. You are not witnessing collapse. You are witnessing rearrangement. The Galatea effect captures this truth beautifully. Your self-belief reshapes outcomes even when the initial conditions appear to worsen. Your inner shift has already begun to alter your field, and the old structures are breaking because they no longer have the energetic permission to remain. In these moments, the mind will try to convince you that you are losing, but you are not losing. You are shedding. You are releasing the final threads of an identity that cannot coexist with the one you are becoming. The worst moment often means you are closest to the flip. The echo grows louder because it is running out of energy. It amplifies itself in a final attempt to be noticed, to be validated, to be revived by your attention. And if you don't recognize this pattern, you may fall back into reaction. You may mistake the echo for the event. You may collapse the new reality by returning to the emotions you are trying to abandon. But if you can remain still within yourself, even for a single breath, you begin to see that the chaos is only a shadow, a residue, a last tremor of the past. There is a quiet inner intelligence available in these moments, a clarity that arises when you turn inward and ask yourself a simple, revealing question. If this is an echo, what new reality is it trying to push me toward? This question changes everything. It shifts your attention from fear to perspective. It reminds you that your inner state is the causative force, not the circumstances swirling around you. It reveals that the discomfort you feel is not a sign of misalignment, but a sign that the old world is losing its grip. When this realization settles in your chest, your breath deepens, your vision clears, the emotional charge of the circumstance collapses, and what once felt threatening begins to look like confirmation. Consider how storms behave. Right before the clouds break open, the wind intensifies, the sky darkens, the air thickens. It feels as though the world is tightening. But this is not resistance. It is release, a build-up that precedes a cleansing, a final contraction before expansion. Your reality behaves the same way. When the external noise peaks, when the echo becomes unbearable, when you feel as though the world is pressing against your skin, you are not being pushed down, you are being pushed through. The storm is not a punishment, it is a passage. What you are learning here is not how to avoid chaos, but how to see through it. When you understand that loudness often signals closeness, when you recognize that the echo intensifies because the breakthrough is near, you stop fearing the turbulence, you stop collapsing into the old identity. You begin to move through the noise with steadiness instead of panic, and in that steadiness the old reality finally releases its hold and the new one steps forward with clarity, coherence, and inevitability. There comes a moment in your awakening when you finally realize that the struggle to maintain focus has never been a struggle of discipline. It has always been a struggle of identity. If you are still trying to hold your focus, if you feel as though you must constantly redirect your thoughts, constantly fight your reactions, constantly remind yourself of what you desire, it is not because you are weak. It is because you are attempting to embody a new reality while still wearing the emotional clothing of the old self. Two identities are competing within you, the one that created the past and the one that is calling you forward. And as long as you stand between them, focus will always feel like labor. The deepest blockade here is subtle but powerful. You are trying to stabilize a new state while inhabiting an identity that contradicts it. You are trying to live in abundance while still feeling unworthy. You are trying to assume love while still expecting disappointment. You are trying to embody confidence while still carrying the reflexes of self-doubt. These contradictions are not failures. They are remnants of a version of you that is dissolving. But if you try to maintain focus without shifting identity, the process becomes heavy. It becomes a daily battle between what you want to believe and what you unconsciously assume to be true. This internal split is the very thing that makes spiritual practice feel exhausting. Psychology calls this tension self-concept congruence, the principle that behavior naturally aligns with identity. When who you believe you are matches the reality you wish to create, focus becomes automatic. You no longer need to force your thoughts. You no longer need to fight the echo. You no longer need to remind yourself of your desire. You simply exist as the version of you who naturally maintains the state. This is why people who shift identity experience sudden leaps in their manifestations. The external world is not responding to their effort. It is responding to their congruence. The transformative twist here is profound. You do not need to practice focus. You need to become the version of yourself who does not lose it. When your identity changes, the internal struggle dissolves. The new state becomes familiar, so familiar that the old one feels foreign, distant, irrelevant. You stop asking how to stay focused because the question no longer applies. You cannot lose what has become natural, and this is the moment when spirituality stops feeling like an effort and starts feeling like a way of being. Identity begins to shift the moment you ask yourself with honesty and depth, what does the version of me who never reacts to echoes believe, assume, and ignore? The answer to this question carries more power than hours of visualization or pages of journaling. It cuts through the noise. It reveals the emotional posture of the future self you are embodying. It shows you how they interpret circumstances, how they move through uncertainty, how they hold themselves in moments when the world tries to drag them back into the past. When you see this version clearly, your breath changes, your posture adjusts, your internal dialogue quiets. You begin to feel the new identity forming in your body, not just in your thoughts. Identity is like the banks of a river. When the banks are narrow and rigid, the water struggles to flow. It stutters. It resists. It crashes against the edges. But when the banks expand and reshape themselves, the river begins to move with ease. The water no longer fights for direction because the structure around it no longer restricts it. Your inner world is the same. When the structure of your identity is shaped around the old self, focus feels like resistance. But when the structure changes, when the banks widen to hold the new version of you, your focus flows naturally, effortlessly, continuously. This chapter of your journey is not about strengthening your will. It is about softening into who you truly are. When identity aligns with desire, focus becomes your nature. The echo loses its power, the past loses its relevance, and the new reality begins to take shape with a quiet inevitability, as if it were always waiting for you to remember that this is who you have been all along. The echo is only the past repeating itself. When your inner state stabilizes, coherence forms and the world reorganizes accordingly. Hold the focus. Withdraw attention from the echo. The new reality emerges through your consistency.